The sun beat down like a punishment on the tin roof of Derek Miles's auto shop, turning the cramped space into an oven that smelled of grease, gasoline, and desperation. Derek wiped a line of sweat from his brow with a rag already soaked in oil, then tossed it aside as he eyed the stack of unpaid bills pinned above his workbench. 35 broke and buried under the weight of a business his father once ran with pride. The garage was barely breathing, just like him. He turned back to the rusted pickup he was patching together with more hope than metal when he heard the cough of a dying engine outside. A battered sedan rolled into the lot, steam hissing from under the hood before it gave up the ghost completely. The door creaked open and out stepped a woman late 20s or early 30s, thin and worn, her face pale under the sun. She cradled a toddler on one hip, the child clutching a ragged stuffed animal and blinking at the brightness. The woman's voice trembled as she approached. "It just stopped," she said, "on the highway. I didn't know where else to go." Her clothes were wrinkled, her shoes mismatched, and her eyes scanned the horizon like she was waiting for something or someone to appear. "I don't have money. I just need to get going." Derek looked at the kid, then back at the car, and sighed. He didn't ask questions. He just popped the hood. As he worked, sweat dripping from his chin, the kid toddled over and offered him a sticky piece of half-melted candy. Derek took it with a chuckle and slipped it into his pocket, like it was gold. When the engine sputtered back to life, Tessashi finally told him. Her name whispered her thanks like it hurt to say it. She buckled the child into the back seat, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. Derek watched them go, dust curling behind their wheels, and figured that was that. Just another lost soul passing through. 2 weeks later, she was back, but different. The car was clean. She was clean. Her hair was brushed, her clothes neat. No kid this time. She stepped into the garage with something unreadable in her eyes and handed Derek a folded piece of paper. He frowned, wiped his hands, and opened it. The grease on his fingers smudged the edge as his eyes scanned the page. Then he stopped breathing. His hands trembled, the paper fluttering in his grip. Tessa didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Derek Miles had never been one for dreams. Life had taught him early that dreams were luxuries, and luxuries were for people who didn't carry their world on their shoulders. After his father passed 5 years ago, his heart giving out in the same corner of the garage he'd worked in since he was a teenager, Derek stepped up, assuming the weight without hesitation. The shop, already bleeding money, was drowning in debt, and Derek threw himself into the grind, determined not to let it die. He never left town, never dated, never spent a dime that wasn't for rent, tools, or the electric bill. People in town respected him in the way you respect an old truck-worn, dependable, but always on the edge of breaking down. His younger brother, Tyrell, once the charming one, had turned to pills, then to harder things. The last time Derek saw him, he was stealing from their father's safe and swearing it would be the last time. That was 3 years ago. There, Mother hadn't spoken more than a few bitter sentences to Derek since. She used to be fierce, proud, the kind of woman who scared half the church choir into behaving, but the losses hollowed her. In her eyes, Derek failed as the man of the family, and she let him wear that guilt like a shroud. So he worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, eating alone, sleeping alone, waking up every morning to a bank account in the red and a garage, full of rust and broken promises. He told himself it was worth it, that somehow keeping the shop alive meant keeping a piece of his father alive. To Dot, then there was Tessa Ward, a woman of few words and haunted eyes, whose sudden reappearance in Derek's life came like a quiet thunderclap. When she first arrived, clutching her child and hope like twin lifelines, Derek didn't ask questions. He could tell she was running. He saw it in the way she jumped at distant sounds, how her eyes darted to the door every few minutes. Her silence spoke volumes. What he didn't know then was the man she was running from, Kyle Ward, was the kind of threat you couldn't outrun. A man with polished shoes and dirty hands, rich enough to control police reports, charming enough to fool judges, cruel enough to leave bruises where no one could see. Tessa had spent the past 6 months slipping through shadows, sleeping in her car, picking up under-the-table jobs, and begging women's shelters not to ask too many questions. When she met Derek, she'd been at the end of her rope, nearly out of gas, money, and faith. Now, 2 weeks later, she stood in his shop, with a different kind of urgency. The document she handed him was a court file, copies of legal evidence she'd risked everything to collect: financial fraud, offshore accounts, photos of injuries, medical reports, statements she'd hidden for years. Enough, potentially, to bring Kyle down if the right hands got hold of them. But the file wasn't just evidence, it was a landmine, and now Derek held it. He looked at Tessa, stunned, the weight of what she'd placed in his hands settling like concrete in his chest. His world, already cracking, suddenly seemed one wrong step from collapsing. If Kyle ever found out, it wouldn't just be Tessa. In danger, it would be him, too. And yet, something in Derek stirred a protective instinct that went deeper than caution. He had nothing left to lose but the failing shop and his stubborn pride. Tessa, for all her mystery, had trusted him when she had no reason to. Now, she was here again, not running, but reaching out. What she brought could shatter everything, or save them both. Derek didn't know yet which, but for the first time in a long while, the choice wasn't just about survival. It was about standing up, about doing something that mattered, even if it cost him everything. Derek stared at the document, the weight of it sinking into his calloused hands, like it might catch fire if he held it too long. Legal jargon blurred on the page, but the bolded words stood out like lightning strikes: transfer of ownership. He looked up at Tessa, heart thudding, mind scrambling to make sense of what she was saying. She took a breath, voice steady but quiet, as if afraid too much volume might shatter the moment. "My aunt passed a few weeks ago," she said, eyes flickering with both sadness and something like a relief, maybe. "She left me a property outside town, a small commercial lot. It has a garage. I've been working with a lawyer to finalize everything. It's mine now." Derek opened his mouth, but no words came. Tessa pressed on, the folded papers trembling slightly in her hand. "I want you to have it, free and clear, no strings." Derek shook his head, almost laughing. "Tessa, I didn't help you for this. I didn't expect anything." His voice was firm, his pride kicking in like an old reflex. But she stepped closer, that same steady fire in her eyes he remembered from the first time she looked him in the face and asked for help. "I know you didn't. That's exactly why. You didn't ask for anything when you could have. You didn't even know me. And I was," she broke off, blinking back something heavy. "You gave me safety, a moment to breathe. No one else did that. This is mine to give. And you deserve more than just barely holding on to what's broken." Derek felt the walls around him shift. He looked around his father's shop, its sagging beams, the oil-stained floor, the photos yellowed on the wall, his dad's hands forever frozen in a handshake with customers long gone. This place wasn't just brick and metal. It was memory, legacy, guilt. Letting go of it felt like betrayal, like turning his back on everything he'd sacrificed to keep it standing. But this offer, Tessa's offer, wasn't charity. It was something purer, a chance. A door he hadn't known was still possible to open. Still, his voice came out hoarse. "If I walk away from this place, it's like I'm giving up on my father." Tessa didn't flinch. "Maybe it's not giving up. Maybe it's letting go of the weight. You've carried this for a long time. Maybe it's time to build something that's yours, not just his." The words lodged deep, uncomfortably true. Derek looked back down at the paper, A new garage, a fresh start, no debt, no ghosts, but also no guarantees. What if he failed? Again, what if it ended the same way, just in a different location? Yet for the first time in years, someone saw him as more than the guy barely scraping by. Someone believed he could do more than survive. He swallowed hard. Everything inside him fought the instinct to refuse. But Tessa just stood there, waiting, not pushing, not begging, offering. Derek looked into her eyes and saw something. More than gratitude, he saw trust, and it terrified him. Because accepting this gift meant stepping out from the shadow of the past. It meant taking a risk, not just with the shop but with himself. Derek took the keys to the new shop with hands that trembled, not from fear, exactly, but from the weight of beginning again. The place was rough, dust thick in the corners and a leaky pipe whining in the back bathroom, but he saw the potential. High ceilings, solid beams, a wide bay door that opened onto a stretch of quiet land just outside town. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was his. He spent the first few weeks cleaning it out, replacing old parts with salvaged equipment, painting the walls in the early mornings before the sun got too high. Tessa dropped by occasionally, not hovering, just checking in with bags of groceries or fresh coffee for him and the small crew he hired to help get things running. At first, it felt strange accepting anything, but she made it easy, casual, like it was no big deal. And when the first customers started showing up, word of mouth carrying faster than flyers ever could, something inside Derek shifted. He was still waking up at dawn, still scrubbing grease from his knuckles. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel like he was barely surviving. It felt like he was building something. But small towns remember everything. Whispers started first quiet, then louder. Customers would look at the new signage, at the fresh paint, and mutter. Funny how Derek lands on his feet with some woman's money. The old landlord, a bitter man with a failing strip mall, went so far as to confront Derek at the hardware store, accusing him of manipulating Tessa. That property was meant for real business owners, not handout cases like you. Even some of Derek's regulars from the old shop stopped coming round. Then came the sideways looks whenever Tessa appeared. People took note. A woman like her, quiet, graceful, bringing casseroles and groceries and sharing soft laughs with Derek under the shade of the awning. It didn't take much for assumptions to spiral. Why would she just give him that place? They said. Must be something going on. Derek tried to brush it off, but every comment dug a little deeper, reinforcing a lifelong belief that nothing good comes without a price. Then Terrell came back. One evening, Derek was locking up when a figure stepped from the shadows of the lot, thinner than he remembered, face sunken, arms twitchy. "Hey bro," Tyrell said, voice too soft, too sweet. "Heard you got a new place. I'm clean now. I want to help." Derek didn't trust him, not really, but the hope in his brother's eyes made it impossible to turn him away. So he let him sweep floors, take phone calls, sort parts. For a while, things seemed okay until the petty cash went missing from the back office one night. Tyrell claimed he didn't know anything, but Derek had seen this before. The twitch in his fingers, the sudden avoidance of eye contact. He didn't even argue when Derek told him to leave. He just shrugged, muttered something about nobody ever forgiving him, and disappeared into the night. Derek was already on edge when Kyle showed up. The man had a smug face made for courtrooms and real estate ads, pressed shirt, $1,000 watch, and a smile full of teeth. He stood in the middle of Derek's shop like he owned it, looking around with amused disdain before zeroing in. "You think this'll last?" Kyle said, low and dangerous. "I know who you are. A broke mechanic leeching off a woman you barely know. You think that's gonna play well when I take her to court?" He leaned closer, voice like poison. "Stay away from my wife." Then he left, just like that, confident the damage was already done. Within days, the rumors escalated. Kyle's version spread like wildfire how Derek was using Tessa, sleeping with her, manipulating her into giving him what she had. It wasn't true, but truth had never mattered much in the court of small-town opinion that Tessa came by less after that. When she did, she was tense, wringing her hands and constantly checking her phone. She wanted to speak up, wanted to clear the air, but Kyle had threatened to file for full custody. "He'll make up anything," she told Derek one night, voice tight with fear. "He'll drag me through court until I have nothing left. He knows how to win." She looked at him like she wanted to do more, like she hated herself for staying quiet, but the silence remained. Derek told her it was fine, that he understood, but the truth was, it stung. Every piece of progress he'd made, felt like it, was coming apart at the seams. The shop was busier than ever, but Derek barely noticed. He was running on fumes, constantly on edge, his faith in people cracking. The final blow came from his mother, who called after hearing the latest round of gossip. "You should have stayed in your father's shop," she said coldly. "We don't take handouts in this family. You've embarrassed us." Derek sat alone that night in the back of the new garage, surrounded by freshly tuned engines and invoices waiting to be signed, and felt more hollow than he had in years. Everything he had built, the work, the shop, the chance was real, but no one saw that. No one believed in it. He was supposed to feel free, finally standing on his own. Instead, he'd never felt more alone. It all came crashing down one muggy morning when the police showed up at Derek's shop with badges and clipboards, their cruiser parked across the entrance like a line drawn in the dirt. Customers stared. A mother ushered her son away. One officer handed Derek a notice guile. Ward had filed a formal complaint, accusing him of coercing Tessa into signing over the property under false pretenses. Derek's heart dropped into his stomach as they moved through the garage, snapping photos, making notes, tagging his equipment for temporary seizure during the investigation. The officers were polite but firm, and Derek, red-faced and silent, couldn't look anyone in the eye. Everything he had built in the last few months, the reputation, the fragile sense of forward momentum, was unraveling in full view. The rumors reignited, hotter than ever. "Told you," someone muttered outside the shop. No way she gave him all that for nothing. By afternoon, Derek was sitting in his office, lights off, sweat clinging to his neck, wondering if he'd been a fool to believe any of it could last. But Tessa was done hiding. The humiliation of seeing Derek dragged through the mud for showing her kindness lit something in her that fear had kept buried too long. She walked into her lawyer's office the next day and filed for full custody of her son, attaching a detailed request for a restraining order against Kyle. She brought emails, texts, medical reports, financial statements, all of it laid bare. She was quiet but unwavering, and when the court date came, she stood tall in the witness box, voice clear and steady. Kyle sat across the courtroom with his usual smugness, but it slipped as Tessa spoke, not just to the judge, but to the truth she'd carried for years. "No one forced me to give Derek anything," she said, hands folded tightly in her lap. "He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for favors. He gave me safety when I had nothing to offer. That garage, that was the first choice I made freely in years. He's not the thief here." Her words landed like thunder in the silent room. Kyle's attorney tried to counter, to twist her statements, but the damage was done. The judge looked at the documents, the timeline, the carefully prepared legal records, and dismissed the complaint outright. Equipment would be returned. The property remained Derek's, and the restraining order was granted effective immediately, but it wasn't over. After the ruling, Tessa pulled Derek aside, her face soft with exhaustion but also something close to relief. "There's something you don't know," she said, handing him a copy of the deed. "I had a feeling Kyle would come after us, so before I gave you the garage, I worked with my lawyer to place it in your name with legal protections even he couldn't touch. It's yours. It was always going to be yours." Derek stared at the paper, then at her, the full weight of what she had done sinking in. She had risked everything, not just once, but twice, and all so he could have a chance. For the first time in his life, someone hadn't just believed in him, they'd bet on him, planned for him, fought for him. The realization hit hard, but it came with clarity. Kyle hadn't just lost control of Tessa, he'd lost the illusion that he ever had it. And Derek, once buried in the ashes of his father's failure, stood on the edge of something real, not given, not stolen, earned. In the weeks after the court ruling, something inside Derek settled, like a storm finally moving on after years of hanging overhead. The garage, now undeniably his, pulsed with new life. He hired 2 more mechanics, painted the office, and upgraded the equipment that had limped through its last decade. But more than that, he started thinking bigger. Partnering with a local vocational school, he created a mentorship program for young people, kids who reminded him of himself at 17, covered in grease and hungry for a purpose. Every week they came through his doors, learning not just how to fix engines, but how to find steadiness in the noise. The shop became more than a business. It became a place of becoming. One morning, Derek quietly drove across town to the old shop. The building still leaned a little to the left. The roof needed work, but the bones were solid. He paid for renovations without making a show of it, just called in a few favors, wrote a few checks. Then he called Tyrell. His brother looked healthier than he had in years, the chaos in his eyes dulled by sobriety and hard-won humility. Derek handed him the keys and said, "It's yours, if you stay clean, if you go to rehab, if you fight for it the way I did." Tyrell didn't say anything for a long time. Then he hugged Derek for the first time since they were kids, and whispered, "I'll try." Meanwhile, Tessa began to breathe again. With the threat of Kyle gone and her voice finally heard, she opened a small art studio in the empty unit beside the garage. Bright windows, wide tables, shelves of paint and paper. She taught weekend classes for kids, including her son, who spent his days running barefoot through the garage, waving wrenches like swords, calling Derek Uncle D. The shop echoed with more than tools, now it echoed with laughter, with hope. One evening, while organizing the storage room, Derek came across an old box of his father's belongings. Among the yellowing receipts and broken carburetors was a photograph of his father leaning against a Mustang, arms folded, eyes tired but proud. Without thinking, Derek brought it into the office and hung it by the door of the new shop. It wasn't about holding on anymore. It was about honoring where he'd come from without being chained to it. He looked round at the full calendar, the hum of work, the faint sound of a child laughing next door, and felt, for the first time, truly light. All those years of giving without return, of staying when it would have been easier to leave, had finally come back to him. Just not in the way he expected, not in money, not in reputation, but in purpose, in people, in peace. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the quiet garage as Derek wiped his hands clean and locked the bay door for the night. The day had been steady, good work, good people, and the hum of tools still lingered faintly in the warm air. As he stepped onto the gravel lot, stretching out the ache in his shoulders, a sputtering noise caught his ear. Just across the street, an old hatchback stalled at the curb, its hood steaming. A young woman stepped out, clearly frustrated, slamming the door a little too hard as she popped the hood and stared helplessly at the engine. Derek didn't pause. He picked up his toolbox from beside the steps and walked over, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. "I'm Derek," he said gently, offering a calm, easy smile. "Let's take a look." The woman glanced at him, uncertain. "I don't have much," she said, her voice low with embarrassment. Derek shook his head. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." Behind him, laughter rang out. Tessa and her son waving from the front steps of the art studio, the boy bouncing in place, calling his name. Derek waved back, the evening light catching on his smile. There was no fanfare, no big moment, just life quiet and real, circling back in ways he hadn't expected. As he leaned into the open hood, tools in hand, a voice echoed in his mind, soft, uncertain. Sometimes you fix a car, sometimes you fix a life, and if you're lucky, both keep running.